Please don't leave me." The words were so soft they should have disappeared beneath the noise of the evening rush, swallowed by the hiss of bus brakes, the murmur of commuters, and the distant hum of traffic rolling through downtown Charlotte. But somehow, they cut through everything. Jaden Brooks stopped mid-step and turned. A frail elderly woman stood near the edge of the bus terminal plaza, her trembling hand stretched toward a crowd that refused to slow down. People flowed around her like water around a stone. Some glanced her way for less than a second before looking down at their phones. Others adjusted their bags and kept moving. A cold November wind swept through the station, rattling the metal benches and sending dry leaves skittering across the pavement. The woman's silver hair fluttered around her face. Her coat looked expensive once, but now it hung loosely from her shoulders, wrinkled and slightly dusty, as though she had been wandering for hours. "Please," she whispered again, her voice barely audible. "Can someone help me?" No one answered. A city bus pulled away from the curb with a low growl, leaving behind a cloud of diesel-scented air. The woman flinched at the sound. Her eyes moved anxiously across unfamiliar faces. Confusion lived in them. Fear too. Jaden watched as a businessman brushed past her shoulder without stopping. A young couple noticed her, exchanged a quick look, and continued walking. A group of college students laughed about something on a phone screen as they passed within feet of her. It was as if she had become invisible. Jaden shifted the strap of his backpack. He was tired. His shift at the grocery store had ended only 20 minutes earlier. His feet ached from standing. Algebra homework waited at home. His mother was working another overnight nursing shift, and there was leftover chili in the fridge that needed reheating. He could have kept walking like everyone else. Nobody would have blamed him. Nobody would have even noticed. Then the woman took a small step forward and looked directly at him. Something in her expression stopped him cold. It wasn't desperation. It wasn't pity. It was loneliness. The kind that settled deep inside a person when the whole world seemed too busy to care. The wind picked up again. The temperature had already dropped below 50 degrees. The woman hugged her arms tightly around herself. Her eyes glistened beneath the station lights. She looked lost in a way that had nothing to do with streets or directions. Jaden felt a knot form in his chest. Around them, the city kept moving. Schedules, deadlines, destinations. Everyone had somewhere important to be. Everyone except the woman standing alone beneath the flickering glow of a bus stop sign. Then something unexpected happened. She looked down at her own hands as though she had never seen them before. Her brow furrowed. A shadow of panic crossed her face. "I can't remember," she whispered. "I don't remember my name." Jaden's heartbeat slowed. For a moment, even the noise of the city seemed distant. The woman lifted her eyes toward him again, frightened and searching. And in that instant, Jaden realized this wasn't just a lost old woman asking for directions. Something was very wrong. Jaden did not answer immediately. He simply stood there beneath the pale glow of the bus terminal lights, studying the woman as she stared at her own hands. The confusion in her face looked genuine. Not exaggerated. Not dramatic. Just frighteningly real. Around them, another wave of commuters poured from a newly arrived bus. Rolling suitcases clicked against the concrete. Someone shouted into a phone. A delivery truck rumbled past the street beyond the station. Yet the woman seemed disconnected from all of it, as though the entire city existed behind a sheet of glass she could no longer reach. "You do not remember your name?" Jaden asked gently. The woman blinked. Her eyes shifted toward him. For a second, she looked hopeful, as if she had finally found someone willing to listen. Then that hope faded. "I thought I did," she said quietly. "I knew it a moment ago. I think I did." She pressed trembling fingers against her temple. "But now it is gone." Jaden glanced around. Nobody seemed interested. A security guard near the station entrance noticed them briefly, then returned his attention to the crowd. The teenager exhaled slowly. His mother had spent years working long shifts at Mercy General Hospital. Sometimes she came home with stories about elderly patients who became disoriented. Patients who forgot dates, addresses, even family members. He remembered her saying that confusion could be dangerous when someone was alone, especially at night. "Do you know where you live?" Jaden asked. The woman looked past him toward the darkening skyline. The glass towers reflected streaks of orange and purple from the setting sun. For several seconds, she said nothing. Then she slowly shook her head. "No." "Do you have a phone?" Again she shook her head. "A purse." Another shake. That answer caught his attention. Most people carried something. A wallet. A handbag. Car keys. Something. Yet she had none of it. Only the coat draped around her shoulders and a small silver bracelet visible beneath her sleeve. It looked expensive, but Jaden knew better than to make assumptions. "What is the last thing you remember?" he asked. The woman frowned. Her eyes narrowed as if searching through a fog. "Rain. Rain. I remember rain on a window." She paused. And a voice. Whose voice? Her lips parted slightly. Then she looked frustrated. "I do not know." The answer seemed to upset her. Jaden noticed her breathing becoming uneven. "It is okay," he said quickly. "You do not have to force it." The woman nodded. A cold gust swept through the terminal. She shivered visibly. That settled it for him. Whatever was happening, she could not remain outside alone. Jaden reached into his backpack and pulled out the gray hoodie he usually wore after work. It was old and slightly faded, but warm. He handed it to her. "Here." The woman looked surprised. "You will be cold." "I will survive." For the first time since he had met her, a faint smile appeared on her face. It was small and fragile, but it transformed her expression. She accepted the hoodie and wrapped it around her shoulders. "Thank you. My name is Jaden," he said. "Jaden Brooks." The woman repeated it quietly. "Jaden," as though she was committing it to memory. Then her eyes suddenly widened. She turned toward the crowded street. Beyond the terminal, the smile vanished. "They are looking for me." Jaden felt a chill run through him. "Who?" The woman stared toward the traffic. Her breathing quickened. "I do not know. You just said they were looking for you." "I know." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "But I do not know who they are." The city lights flickered on one by one as darkness settled over Charlotte. Headlights streamed along the avenue. Neon signs glowed against the gathering night. Jaden followed her gaze, but saw nothing unusual. No one watching them. No one approaching. Yet the fear in her eyes looked real. Very real. Then, from somewhere deep within the station, a television mounted above the ticket counters switched to a breaking news broadcast. The bright red banner flashed across the screen. Neither of them noticed it yet, but several people nearby suddenly stopped walking and turned toward the television, their expressions changing almost instantly. Jaden noticed the shift in the crowd before he understood the reason for it. People who had been rushing toward buses moments earlier were suddenly slowing down. A woman carrying a laptop bag stopped near a pillar. Two construction workers turned their heads toward the television hanging above the ticket counters. Even the security guard glanced up. The bright screen cast flashes of red and blue light across the polished floor. "Something happened," Jaden murmured. The elderly woman remained beside him, clutching the gray hoodie around her shoulders. She seemed unaware of the television. Her attention was fixed on the moving traffic outside, as if she expected someone to emerge from the darkness at any moment. Jaden looked up at the screen. The news anchor spoke with the urgent tone reserved for major stories. A banner stretched across the bottom of the broadcast. "Missing business leader. Search underway." The words immediately caught his attention. Behind the anchor appeared a photograph of an elegant older woman standing beside a city skyline. She wore a tailored navy suit. Silver hair framed a confident smile. Reporters crowded the background of the image. Flashbulbs sparkled like stars. The anchor continued speaking. "Authorities and private security teams are actively searching for 78-year-old philanthropist and business leader Evelyn Whitmore after she unexpectedly disappeared earlier today. Family representatives have asked the public to contact authorities with any information." Jaden's eyes widened slightly. The woman in the photograph looked familiar. Not exactly the same. The woman beside him appeared exhausted, disoriented, and far more vulnerable than the poised figure on television. But there was something undeniable. The shape of her face, the silver hair, the eyes. He glanced back at the elderly woman standing beside him. She stared blankly at a passing bus. She seemed completely disconnected from the report. "Miss," he asked carefully, "does the name Evelyn mean anything to you?" The woman looked at him. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a faint reaction flickered across her face. Not recognition exactly. More like an echo. "Evelyn," she repeated softly. The name seemed to linger in the air. "I think." She stopped. Her forehead tightened. "I do not know." Jaden looked back toward the television. The broadcast continued. A reporter stood outside a towering office building surrounded by cameras and security personnel. Whitmore Global Industries released a statement this evening expressing concern for Ms. Whitmore's well-being. Sources say she was last seen leaving a private charity event earlier this afternoon. Nearby passengers began discussing the story among themselves. "That is the billionaire, right?" one man asked. "I saw her on Forbes. They said she is worth billions," another replied. "How does someone like that just disappear?" Jaden swallowed. The elderly woman certainly did not look like someone worth billions of dollars. Her shoes were dusty. Her hair was slightly tangled from the wind. There was no entourage, no driver, no assistants, just a frightened woman standing alone at a bus station. Still, the resemblance bothered him. Before he could think further, a sharp voice interrupted the moment. "Excuse me." Jaden turned. A woman in a navy blazer approached from the station office. Her name badge identified her as Olivia Grant, operations manager. Her expression carried the practiced firmness of someone used to solving problems quickly. She glanced at the elderly woman and then at Jaden. "Has she been here long?" Olivia asked. "I am not sure," Jaden replied. "She seems confused. She cannot remember where she lives." Olivia sighed. "We have had several complaints." "Complaints? People think she is bothering passengers." Jaden frowned. "She is asking for help." Olivia crossed her arms. "And unfortunately, this terminal cannot become a shelter." The words landed harder than she intended. The elderly woman lowered her eyes. Her fingers tightened around the borrowed hoodie. Jaden immediately noticed the change. He remembered the loneliness he had seen earlier. The feeling of being invisible. The feeling that nobody wanted you around. "She is not causing trouble," he said quietly. Olivia looked unconvinced. Around them, the station lights reflected against the glass walls as night fully settled over Charlotte. Outside, rain began tapping softly against the windows. Inside, the television continued broadcasting updates about the missing billionaire. And for the first time, Jaden started wondering if the frightened woman standing beside him was connected to that story in ways neither of them yet understood. The rain strengthened outside, tracing silver lines down the tall glass walls of the terminal. The steady rhythm of droplets against the windows filled the silence that followed Olivia Grant's words. For a moment, nobody spoke. The elderly woman lowered her head, avoiding eye contact with everyone around her. Jaden could see how uncomfortable she felt. It was the same look he had seen before in people who felt unwanted. The same expression he remembered from a classmate whose family had lost their apartment and spent weeks pretending everything was normal. The same expression his mother carried on the rare nights when exhaustion followed her home from the hospital. Olivia checked her watch. "I understand you are trying to help," she said, keeping her voice professional. "But we cannot have people sitting here indefinitely. If she needs assistance, someone should contact the authorities." "Then let us contact them," Jaden replied. Olivia seemed surprised by how quickly he answered. The elderly woman looked up at him. "You would do that?" she asked quietly. "Of course. Even if I cannot tell them who I am." Jaden nodded. "That is exactly why we should call." For the first time, some of the fear left her eyes. Not completely, but enough for him to notice. Olivia hesitated. She appeared to be reconsidering the situation. Before she could respond, another announcement echoed through the station speakers, informing passengers of delayed arrivals due to worsening weather. The sound bounced across the high ceiling. More travelers entered from the rain, carrying umbrellas and shaking water from their coats. The terminal became even busier. Yet somehow the elderly woman seemed more isolated than ever. Jaden glanced toward a small cafe tucked beside the waiting area. Warm yellow light spilled from its windows. Steam fogged the glass. People sat inside holding coffee cups while escaping the cold. An idea came to him. He reached into his pocket and checked the money he had left from his shift. It was not much, just enough for dinner and bus fare home. Still, he already knew what he was going to do. "Have you eaten?" he asked the woman. She looked confused by the question. "I do not remember." "That probably means no." "Jaden," Olivia said carefully, "you do not have to take responsibility for this." He looked at her. "Someone should." Olivia opened her mouth as if she wanted to argue. Then she stopped. Perhaps she saw the determination in his face. Perhaps she simply had no answer. Either way, she stepped back. "Fine," she said quietly, "but stay inside where it is warm." Jaden smiled politely. "Thank you." He guided the woman toward the cafe. The smell of fresh coffee and baked bread greeted them immediately. A few customers glanced up as they entered. Most quickly returned to their conversations. Jaden purchased a bowl of soup and a cup of hot tea. The total consumed nearly all the cash he had left. He did not regret it for a second. The woman stared at the meal as though it were something precious. "This is for me?" she asked. "Yes." Her eyes glistened slightly. "You barely know me." "Maybe." He shrugged. "But you looked hungry." The woman wrapped both hands around the warm cup. Steam rose between her fingers. For several moments, she simply sat there absorbing the heat. Outside, the rain continued falling. Inside, the cafe lights painted soft reflections across the polished floor. The television, mounted in the corner, remained tuned to the same news coverage. Images of Evelyn Whitmore appeared again. More reporters. More speculation. More concern. Jaden noticed the woman occasionally glancing toward the screen without seeming to recognize herself. Then something unexpected happened. As she lifted the tea toward her lips, her sleeve shifted slightly. The silver bracelet on her wrist caught the cafe light. A small engraved inscription became visible for the first time. Jaden leaned forward. The engraving appeared delicate but clear. 2 words were etched into the metal. "Remember who?" The woman froze. Her gaze locked onto the bracelet. Her breathing slowed. For a brief second, something flickered across her face. Recognition. Not of a person, not of a place, but of a memory struggling to rise through the fog. Then she whispered 3 words so softly that only Jaden could hear them. "The Blue Tower." The words hung between them like a spark in darkness. The Blue Tower. Jaden leaned forward immediately. "What Blue Tower?" The woman blinked several times. The brief flash of recognition that had appeared in her eyes seemed to fade as quickly as it had arrived. She looked down at the bracelet again. Her fingers traced the engraved letters. "Remember who?" "I do not know," she admitted softly. "I just saw it." "Saw what?" "Glass." Her gaze drifted toward the rain-streaked windows of the terminal. Blue glass. Very tall. She closed her eyes. There was sunlight on it. Jaden listened carefully. It was not much, but it was the first specific memory she had mentioned all evening. Before he could ask another question, the television volume suddenly increased. A station employee near the counter had apparently turned it up after the news program announced another update. Several customers looked toward the screen. The anchor appeared more serious than before. "Authorities are expanding the search area tonight as concern grows over the disappearance of prominent business leader Evelyn Whitmore." New photographs filled the screen. Charity events, corporate meetings, public appearances. One image showed Evelyn standing in front of a striking skyscraper covered in blue reflective glass. Jaden froze. The tower looked familiar even to him. It dominated the Charlotte skyline, the headquarters of Whitmore Global Industries. The woman beside him slowly lifted her head. Her eyes locked onto the image. For a second, the entire cafe seemed to disappear around her. The rain, the conversations, the clatter of dishes. Everything faded beneath the silence of that moment. Her hand tightened around the teacup. "That building," she whispered. Jaden followed her gaze. "The Blue Tower?" The woman nodded. Very slowly. "Yes." A pulse of excitement shot through him. "Do you remember it?" "I think so." She stared at the screen. "It feels important." At a nearby table, 2 customers overheard the exchange. One of them glanced between the television and the elderly woman sitting beside Jaden. His expression changed. He nudged his friend. Both stared openly now. Jaden noticed. So did the woman. She immediately looked uncomfortable. The brief confidence she had gained seemed to shrink again. "Everyone keeps looking at me," she murmured. "Because they are trying to figure things out," Jaden replied gently. "Just like us." But the attention continued growing. More people were beginning to notice the resemblance between the missing billionaire and the confused woman sitting in the cafe. Some whispered. Others discreetly checked their phones. One person even pulled up the news article and compared the photograph to the woman from across the room. Olivia Grant entered the cafe moments later. Her expression was tighter than before. "Jaden," she said quietly. "Can I speak with you?" He stood and followed her a few feet away. Olivia lowered her voice. "Someone reported that woman." "Reported her for what?" "They think she might be connected to the story on television." Jaden glanced back toward the table. The elderly woman sat alone, nervously twisting the bracelet around her wrist. "Maybe she is." Olivia exhaled. "If she is Evelyn Whitmore, private security teams are probably searching the entire city right now." "Then that is good news." Olivia hesitated. Unless they think you are involved somehow. Jaden frowned. Involved. A missing billionaire suddenly appears beside a teenager nobody knows. People ask questions. The words settled heavily between them. Jaden looked around the cafe. Several strangers were openly watching him now. Their expressions carried curiosity, suspicion, judgment. He felt a knot form in his stomach. Yet when he looked back at the woman sitting alone beneath the warm cafe lights, he remembered the fear in her eyes when nobody would help her. He remembered her trembling voice asking not to be left behind. Whatever happened next, he knew one thing with certainty. He was not walking away. Then the entrance doors burst open as three men in dark suits hurried into the terminal from the rain, scanning every face they passed. The moment the three men entered, the atmosphere inside the terminal shifted. Conversations softened. Curious glances followed them as they moved through the crowd with purpose. Rainwater glistened on their dark coats beneath the overhead lights. One carried a tablet. Another spoke quietly into a wireless earpiece. The third scanned the room with intense focus, studying faces one by one. Jaden felt the tension immediately. Nearby customers stopped pretending not to watch. Even Olivia Grant turned toward the entrance. The elderly woman noticed the men too. Her shoulders stiffened. Her fingers tightened around the warm paper cup resting between her hands. For a brief second, fear flashed across her face. Not panic, not terror, just uncertainty. The kind that came from not knowing whether the people approaching were strangers or memories. Jaden slowly returned to the table and sat beside her. "Are you okay?" he asked softly. The woman kept her eyes on the men crossing the terminal. "I do not know," she admitted. "I feel like I should know them." The rain tapped steadily against the windows. Outside, headlights smeared across wet streets like ribbons of gold and white. Inside the cafe, the warm lighting seemed gentler now, creating a small island of calm in the middle of growing attention. The woman looked down at the bracelet again. "Remember who?" The engraved words reflected faintly beneath the light. She traced them with her thumb. "I keep trying," she whispered. "I keep reaching for the memories, but they slip away." Jaden nodded. "Then do not force it." She looked at him. What if they never come back? He considered the question. For a 17-year-old, it felt impossibly large. Yet the answer arrived naturally. "Then you start with what you know." "And what do I know?" "You know you are here." The woman listened carefully. "You know you are safe." He smiled gently. "And you know you are not alone." Something softened in her expression. The tension around her eyes eased. Outside, thunder rolled faintly across the distant skyline. The city seemed farther away than ever. For several moments, neither spoke. They simply sat there listening to the rain. The television continued broadcasting updates. Reporters stood beneath umbrellas. Search teams were mentioned. Corporate representatives issued statements. Yet the noise of the broadcast felt strangely unimportant compared to the quiet conversation happening at the small cafe table. The woman looked around the room. Families waited for buses. Friends shared coffee. A father helped his young daughter zip her jacket. An elderly couple laughed softly over a crossword puzzle. Ordinary moments. Simple moments. She watched them as though seeing them for the first time. "Everyone seems to know where they belong," she said. "Maybe not everyone," Jaden replied. "Most people are just trying to figure it out." A faint smile appeared on her face. "Your mother raised you well." The comment surprised him. "You remember my mother?" "No." The woman shook her head. "But I can tell." Jaden looked down for a moment. His mother worked long hours. She came home exhausted more often than not. Yet she always found time to ask about school. Always found time to listen. He suddenly wished he could call her. Tell her about the strange evening unfolding around him. Across the terminal, the three men in suits had stopped near the information desk. They were speaking with station employees now. One of them showed a photograph on his tablet. Another pointed toward different sections of the terminal. The search was narrowing. They were getting closer. Yet somehow the woman beside him seemed calmer than before. The fear that had followed her through the evening had begun to loosen its grip. Not because her memories had returned. Not because the mystery had been solved. But because someone had chosen to stay. She stared out at the rain-streaked glass and quietly exhaled. "You know something, Jaden?" she said. "What?" Her eyes glistened beneath the soft cafe lights. "You were the first person who looked at me tonight and saw a human being instead of a problem." The words settled gently between them. Neither spoke afterward. They simply sat together in the warm glow of the cafe while rain fell across the city beyond the windows, and for the first time all evening, the woman no longer looked lost. The quiet moment ended when one of the men in dark suits suddenly stopped walking. His eyes locked onto the elderly woman sitting beside Jaden. For a second, he did not move. Then every trace of professional composure vanished from his face. "My God," he whispered. The words were not loud, yet they carried across the cafe. The two men beside him immediately turned. One nearly dropped the tablet he was holding. The other stared in disbelief. Around them, conversation stopped. The terminal seemed to hold its breath. The three men hurried forward, weaving through tables and passengers. Olivia Grant noticed the change and followed several steps behind. The elderly woman looked up as they approached. Confusion returned to her eyes. She glanced at Jaden. "Do you know them?" she asked quietly. Before he could answer, the oldest of the three men stopped several feet away. His eyes were already shining with emotion. "Ms. Whitmore," he said carefully. "Ms. Whitmore, can you hear me?" The woman studied his face. She searched for recognition and found none. "Should I know you?" she asked. The man's expression faltered. "I am Richard Hayes. I have worked for you for 22 years. The woman blinked. Nothing came. No memory. No recognition. Only uncertainty. Richard pressed a hand against his chest and slowly exhaled. Relief and concern battled across his face at the same time. "We have been searching everywhere for you." The younger man beside him quickly spoke into his earpiece. "We found her. Confirmed. She is safe." Within seconds, activity exploded throughout the terminal. Phones appeared. Whispers spread. Passengers exchanged stunned looks. The television above the counter continued displaying images of Evelyn Whitmore, while the real woman sat quietly, holding a cup of tea in borrowed clothing. Olivia Grant stopped beside the table. Her eyes moved from the news broadcast to the woman and back again. The color drained from her face. "You mean?" Richard nodded. "This is Evelyn Whitmore." The words seemed to ripple through the room. "A billionaire. A philanthropist. The founder of one of the largest companies in the region. The woman countless people had watched on television. The woman entire security teams had spent hours searching for. Yet none of that seemed to matter to the woman herself. She simply looked overwhelmed. "I am sorry," she said softly. "I wish I remembered." Richard's eyes softened. "You do not need to apologize." He knelt beside her chair. "The doctors warned us memory confusion was possible after the episode this afternoon." The woman stared at him. "Episode? A temporary medical event." Richard smiled reassuringly. "You became disoriented. When we realized you were missing, everyone started looking for you." The woman lowered her gaze. "I caused trouble." "No." Richard shook his head immediately. "You caused concern because people care about you." Then his attention shifted toward Jaden. For the first time, he seemed to fully notice the teenager sitting beside her. "And you are?" "Jaden Brooks." Richard extended his hand without hesitation. "Then you are the young man who stayed with her." Jaden nodded awkwardly. "I just helped." One of the other men looked genuinely astonished. "Do you understand how many people walked past her today?" Jaden glanced at the woman. "I do not know." "Hundreds," the man replied quietly. Richard looked around the crowded terminal. Security footage already confirmed it. Hundreds of people saw her. His eyes returned to Jaden. "But you stopped." The room grew silent again. Olivia lowered her gaze. Several passengers who had ignored the elderly woman earlier now looked visibly uncomfortable. The contrast was impossible to miss. Hours ago, she had appeared to be a confused stranger nobody wanted near them. Now everyone knew she was one of the most powerful women in the state. Yet Jaden realized something important. The reason he had helped her had nothing to do with money, status, or influence. He had offered help before he knew any of that. Evelyn slowly turned toward him. The confusion in her memory remained, but her eyes were clearer now. Warmer, steadier. She reached out and gently placed her hand over his. "I may not remember much tonight," she said softly, "but I know one thing for certain. When the world forgot me, you did not." The terminal remained unusually quiet after Evelyn's words. Even the people who had been whispering moments earlier seemed unsure what to say. Rain continued sliding down the windows in silver streams, while the glow from passing headlights painted shifting reflections across the floor. Richard Hayes slowly rose from beside Evelyn's chair and looked around the room. His gaze moved across the faces of passengers, employees, and curious onlookers. Many of them lowered their eyes. The contrast was impossible to ignore. Only a few hours earlier, most had seen a confused elderly woman and chosen to keep walking. Now they saw one of the most influential business leaders in the country. Yet the person sitting in the chair had not changed. Only their perception of her had. Olivia Grant appeared deeply uncomfortable. She stepped forward and clasped her hands together. "Ms. Whitmore," she began quietly, "I owe you an apology." Evelyn looked up. Olivia took a breath. "When I first saw you, I assumed you were a problem that needed to be moved somewhere else. I did not stop to ask what you were going through. I did not stop to help." The station manager glanced briefly toward Jaden. "He showed more compassion in 10 minutes than I showed all evening." Evelyn studied her for a moment. Then a gentle smile appeared. "We all make mistakes," she said softly. "The important thing is what we learn from them." Olivia nodded, visibly emotional. Nearby passengers exchanged glances. Several seemed affected by the conversation. One woman approached cautiously. "I walked past you earlier," she admitted. "I remember seeing you standing alone." Her voice grew quieter. "I am sorry I did not stop." Another person offered a similar apology. Then another. One by one, people who had ignored Evelyn found themselves confronting an uncomfortable truth. They had not intended to be cruel. Most had simply been busy, distracted, focused on their own schedules and responsibilities. Yet kindness often disappeared in exactly that way. Not through hatred, through indifference. Evelyn listened patiently to every apology. She did not criticize anyone. She did not shame anyone. Instead, she thanked each person for speaking honestly. Richard watched the scene with quiet amazement. Finally, he turned toward Jaden again. "Your mother must be extraordinary." Jaden smiled awkwardly. "She would probably tell you she is just tired most of the time." A few people laughed softly. Richard reached into his jacket and removed a business card. "I would like to meet her." Jaden blinked. "Why?" "Because she raised someone remarkable." Before Jaden could respond, Evelyn slowly stood from her chair. Richard immediately moved closer in case she needed support, but she remained steady. Her memory had not fully returned, yet her confidence seemed stronger than it had all evening. She looked directly at Jaden. "You spent your money on food for a stranger." Jaden shrugged. "You looked hungry. You gave me your hoodie. You looked cold." Evelyn smiled. "And you stayed." The simple words carried more weight than any speech. Around them, people listened carefully. "I spent my life building companies," Evelyn continued. "I have met presidents, executives, investors, and celebrities." Her eyes never left Jaden. "But character is still the rarest thing I have ever encountered." The teenager immediately looked embarrassed. "I was just trying to help." "Exactly," Evelyn replied. "And that is why it matters." Richard exchanged a glance with the other members of the search team. Then he stepped forward. "Ms. Whitmore, the physicians would like to examine you as soon as possible." Evelyn nodded. "Of course." Before leaving, however, she turned toward Jaden one final time. "Tomorrow morning," she said, "a car will come for you and your mother." Jaden looked surprised. "You do not have to do that." Evelyn's smile widened. "Perhaps not." She gently squeezed his shoulder. "But I would very much like to thank the young man who remembered my humanity when I had forgotten my own name." Outside, the rain finally began to ease. The storm that had covered the city all evening was slowly drifting away, leaving behind only a soft mist beneath the streetlights. The next morning arrived with the kind of sunlight that only appears after a long storm. The sky above Charlotte was clear and bright, washed clean by the rain that had fallen through the night. Water still shimmered on sidewalks and rooftops, catching the morning light like scattered pieces of glass. Jaden stood outside the small apartment building he shared with his mother, adjusting the collar of his clean shirt. He had barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he found himself replaying the events of the previous evening. The lost woman, the crowded terminal, the television broadcast, the realization that the stranger everyone ignored was one of the most influential people in the country. It still felt unreal. A black sedan pulled quietly to the curb. The driver stepped out and opened the rear door. There was no flashing attention, no dramatic display. Just simple courtesy. Jaden glanced at his mother. Angela Brooks smiled and squeezed his shoulder. "Ready?" she asked. "I think so." The drive across the city was peaceful. Morning traffic moved steadily beneath clear blue skies. As they approached the financial district, Glass towers rose above the streets like mirrors reflecting the sun. Then Jaden saw it. The blue tower. The building the elderly woman had remembered before she remembered anything else. Its reflective surface stretched into the sky, glowing softly against the morning light. For a moment, he understood why the image had remained buried somewhere in her memory. It was impossible to forget. Inside the building, they were greeted warmly and escorted to a private floor overlooking the city. The office waiting beyond the elevator was elegant, but surprisingly simple. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the skyline. Fresh flowers sat near the entrance. Sunlight poured across polished wood floors. Evelyn Whitmore stood near the windows waiting for them. She looked different from the woman Jaden had met at the terminal. Rested, confident, strong. Yet her smile was exactly the same. The moment she saw him, her face brightened. Jaden. She crossed the room and embraced him gently. I am very happy to see you again. Angela watched with quiet amazement. Evelyn turned toward her. You must be the mother responsible for raising such a remarkable young man. Angela laughed softly. He keeps me humble. They spent the next hour talking. Not about business. Not about wealth. Not about influence. They talked about family, school, long work shifts, community, the things that mattered when titles and bank accounts disappeared. At one point, Evelyn looked out the window toward the city below. Something became very clear to me yesterday, she said quietly. The world often notices people because of what they have. Her gaze returned to Jaden. But character reveals who they truly are. She reached into a folder resting on her desk and removed a document. This is a full scholarship fund. Jaden blinked. A scholarship? Evelyn nodded. For your education. He immediately shook his head. You do not owe me anything. Evelyn smiled gently. This is not payment. She placed the document in front of him. It is an investment in someone who reminds me that kindness still exists. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Sunlight streamed through the windows. Far below, the city moved through another ordinary day. Cars crossed intersections. People hurried to work. Life continued. Yet something had quietly changed. Not because a billionaire had been found. Not because a scholarship had been offered. But because one person had chosen to stop when everyone else kept walking. Later that afternoon, Jaden left the tower carrying nothing more than a folder and a grateful heart. A soft breeze drifted through the streets as he walked toward home. The city felt different somehow. Warmer, brighter. Above him, sunlight reflected from the blue glass tower and stretched across the sidewalk ahead. Jaden paused for a moment and looked back. High above the city, Evelyn stood near her office window, watching him disappear into the crowd. Neither waved. Neither spoke. They simply shared a quiet understanding. Then Jaden turned the corner and continued walking beneath the afternoon sun while the city moved gently around him. And in the silence that followed, kindness felt larger than wealth, stronger than status, and far more memorable than either one could ever be.